Thank you, Emily. My name is Marvin J. Price. I'm one of the vice presidents for economic development recruitment at the Charlotte Regional Business Alliance. I serve on NCEDA's professional development committee, and I'm just happy to be here. So I want to go ahead and kick things off and welcome you guys. Thank you for being here. Today's NCEDA webinar is Keeping Up Appearances, Why Now is the Time for a Marketing Refresh. We'll get started in a minute, but first let's thank our annual sponsors. You will see their names and logos on the screen now. These companies and organizations are committed to the NCEDA and its mission every day, and it's our sincere thanks that go out to them. Marketing and branding are central to a successful economic development strategy. This is true in every business cycle. With COVID-19 shifting the global economic terrain, economic development organizations are looking hard at how their messaging and marketing themes will resonate in a post-pandemic world. With us today are three experts on this wide-ranging subject, all of them drawn from the ranks of the NCEDA membership. First up, we have Ginger Atwood. She's the founder and president of the Alexis Agency, a full-service marketing and public relations advertising agency with offices in Greensboro as well as Vero Beach, Florida. Ginger's expertise includes crisis communication, and she's worked with clients in aviation, financial services, healthcare, retail, renewable energy, construction, and a list of others. Next up, from the Alleyway Marketing in Durham, we have Irene Pappas, who is a project manager and strategic public relations specialist with a wide range of brand management experience. Her diverse background includes working with communities, municipalities, and global and emerging brands, providing her with the acumen to assess and fill individual client needs. Last but certainly not least, we have Colleen Walton. She's a marketing strategist for Brand Acceleration, where she oversees brand identification and marketing program implementation for communities, counties, and regions across the 17-state territory. Based in Central Florida, Colleen travels the country talking about creative marketing, business, and talent attraction and public relations. Each of our guests will be presenting in areas of expertise. Ginger will lead us off with a high-level overview of current environment and how leading communities are reassessing their brands and what those reassessments involved. Colleen will discuss what brand evaluation means in terms of economic development messaging and marketing. Irene will talk about websites and the specifics involved in conveying brands and messaging over your website. Really need that. Where obviously there's a lot to cover and you don't want to hear just from me. So I'll turn today's webinar over to our guests, starting with Ginger. So Ginger, why do organizations need to reevaluate their brand message?
Thank you, Marvin. There's nothing like a crisis to make organizations and communities pause and question if their brand's message is on point and still relevant. But there are several compelling reasons to reevaluate your brand's message at this time. The results and effects of COVID-19 are the most likely reasons to reevaluate, but definitely consider the progress of social justice issues and corporate social responsibility and what this currently means to communities, businesses, and municipalities, including sustainability issues such as renewable energies, building, and plastics, for example. In reevaluating your organization's brand message, pay close attention to the macroeconomics of this societal shift before just looking inward at your organization or community. This point in time and current state of affairs is the perfect example of when organizations have no choice but to pivot and to pivot quickly. With the realization that many aspects of our society, including how businesses operate and communicate with the public, their stakeholders, and policymakers, will not return to normal as we know it. We're literally witnessing a societal shift from manufacturing, architecture, general contracting, public transportation, and many more industries. If you weren't confident where you were headed before all of this started, you likely have opportunities before you that you've never considered or thought would be possible. So clear messaging during and after the pandemic is critical to sustaining your organization's brand, especially for those of you who have direct economic and social impacts on your communities. And let's face it, most every organization makes an economic impact.
Okay, well, thanks for that. We know why it's important. So why do organizations, or following up on that, how do these organizations reevaluate their brand message and strategy?
Yeah, that's a great question. We recommend, especially at this point in time, to start with 3 primary actions that will help you lay the groundwork. First of all, conduct a landscape analysis and stakeholder mapping. Second is keep your eye on what's coming up in November. And the third is get out in front of this crisis. So to start with number 1, stop and take a temperature check by conducting a complete landscape analysis and stakeholder mapping at various levels. This analysis will systematically gather and analyze qualitative information and help you determine whose interests should be taken into account. If you've done this in the past, you need to do it again because COVID-19, social issues, and sustainability issues have changed the entire landscaping of every community and organization. Just take, for example, the recent cancellation of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline that's being developed by Dominion and Duke Energy. This issue is growing and is already forcing a shift in how economic developers in Eastern North Carolina will position themselves to future job creators. And if you've never conducted a landscape or stakeholder analysis, now is the perfect time because the world is changing for everyone at the same moment. This is actually quite a unique opportunity for everyone. So if you're struggling with where to go from here, this will help you see more clearly and likely uncover new opportunities and collaborations. With this analysis, find your top 3 to 5 stakeholder groups. Identify what they care about and what they need and how they can help you achieve your mission. And then once your primary stakeholders are identified, then determine who has direct influence over them and have common characteristics, which becomes your secondary stakeholders. Let that be your guide to start your message redevelopment. And then number 2, again, in addition to these external influences that are changing our economies and communities, keep your eye on the election in November and how your strategy and messaging is positioned for the outcome in either direction. And last but not least, getting out in front of this crisis is critical. And with a unified message from the top down and the inside out of your organization to include absolutely everyone. Unfortunately, if you didn't put it into action, your crisis communication plan at the onset of the pandemic, you're late to the game. But the good news is there's still time to recover because this crisis isn't over. With the onset of COVID-19, for example, we immediately implemented our crisis plan for each client, including clear messages to the public, their stakeholders, government agencies, the counties, and each organization's clients and board of directors. We took a look at the organization itself, how it benefits the community as a whole, and how the organization could not only survive the crisis, but potentially grow in new areas and even help other businesses by finding new ways to collaborate. So your updated message should be consistent at every point of contact, from talking to your stakeholders to disseminating social media messages, your public service announcements, direct marketing, and all digital content. Yes, your website, but also all digital content. The messaging should stay with this consistency for at least 12 months, if not longer. And while new messaging should certainly be reflected in your advertising, I can't say enough that you're not going to advertise yourself out of the situation. Public relations and advocacy are keys as we move through the pandemic and the societal shifts together. So lean into it and look ahead to new opportunities.
Well, thank you for that. I really appreciate that. But I think that kind of transitions us into the messaging. So Colleen, if you don't mind, once a community has reevaluated their brand message, how do they translate that into a marketing strategy?
I always forget to unmute myself, I'm sorry. So yeah, what Ginger said is a great foundation. So basically going out, figuring out what your strengths are, what your new messaging needs to be, And then it's really this question of turning it into marketing. It's like I have all these ideas, I kind of know what I want to do, but I don't know how to get that together in a way that other people are going to understand. So really the first question you have to ask yourself is, what are your short and long-term goals? Where do you see your community 6 months from now? Where do you see them a year from now? And what are the challenges that you're going to have to address in that time frame? So the question here is really, have your target audiences changed? So if you say you have an industry in your community that is not going to come back, or maybe isn't going to come back quickly, or maybe you've decided to kind of pivot and target a different industry. We see a lot of communities going after medical device now. We see a lot of communities focusing on reshoring, bringing their supply chain closer. And I've talked to a lot of economic developers about this, where they're saying that they're wanting to bring their supply chain either, if not just domestically, but actually like to their county or at least to their state. So that's going to change who you're marketing to and what your strategy needs to be. And so really the question there is, who are the audiences for that information? So if I'm now going after medical device, or I'm going after companies that are overseas and trying to bring them to my state, who are those people? And then what are the messages that they need to hear? And when Ginger was talking about kind of identifying what your strengths are and what your assets are, how do you then translate those into the messages that you communicate? So what I always tell people is, make a list of the things you want. So say a year from now, I want to have brought one company from overseas and maybe one company in my supply chain into my county. That's my objective for the next year. So then who are the audiences for that message? What are they going to want to hear from me? And then that defines the message. So if it's going to be somebody in my supply chain, what I'm going to be able to message to them is, here's what I have here. Here's the company that can buy from you. Here's how we get materials in and out. So all of that stuff, and we talk about this in marketing before COVID, but it's particularly important now because we have this added layer of, we're going to start judging communities on how they responded. The way I read an article one time where it's talking about how people are going to be different in job interviews. You know, there's always the question of where you're supposed to ask the interviewer about the company culture. The question that people are going to be asking now to judge a company is, how did you treat your employees during the pandemic? And so I think we're going to see that happening with site selectors. They're going to come to a community and they're going to say, how did you respond? What did you do for your companies? What are you going to do for my company if something like that happens to us? And that needs to be taken into account in all of this. So it's going to be the same things we've marketed before: assets of transportation, connectivity, materials, your supply chain, but it's going to be this added layer, and that all needs to serve a larger objective. So bringing those companies from overseas, bringing your supply chain in, meeting that immediate need.
Okay. Well, what tactics should a community use to market?
So the challenge that I have with this question, and if anybody has seen me speak, you know I say this in every presentation, there is no magic answer. If I could sit in front of you guys and tell you, if you do these three things, all of your problems would be solved. I would make so much money doing that. But there is no answer. There is no one thing that any one community can do. And that's because no two communities are the same. Even communities, I have 2 client communities that neighbor each other, and their messaging is different because their assets are different and their personalities are different. So there is no one thing for you to do. I think the thing you have to ask yourself, kind of tying back to what I was just talking about, is who are your target audiences and what are the best ways to reach them? If your community is going to have a talent shortage, if your unemployment rate is going to go back down and you're going to be back where you were 6 months or a year ago, where you don't have enough people, that's going to be a completely different type of marketing than business attraction. So talent attraction is going to be obviously marketing things like quality of life, cost of living, safety, and particularly right now, access to healthcare. And you're going to be using a lot of social media marketing for that. That's going to be more of your travel and tourism type of marketing. But if you're going to do business attraction, that's going to be your business attraction assets. So transportation, connectivity, utility rates, available land, available sites. And that's going to be more direct marketing. Probably one of the best tactics we've seen in this is going to be direct email. And I know I've spoken about this at an NCEDA conference before, so people are probably sick of hearing me say it, but email marketing is probably one of the greatest things to come about, because you can send a direct message to a specific audience. We're doing one right now actually for an organization in North Carolina where each email goes to a different industry. And so if we have one that's specifically in, say, biotech, all of the messaging and all of the assets that we mentioned are about that. And I'm not putting 1,000 postcards in the mail and hoping they get to where they're supposed to go and the right person reads it. I'm crafting a message that's going directly to them, addressing that exact marketing message that I want to put in there. So.
Okay, well, with so many changes to marketing, your brand, and all of these other things, what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see economic developers make when they're updating their marketing?
So I think I'm going to do two. So I think my number one is what I have been referring to as reckless optimism. I think that there's this mindset right now to be extremely positive. We don't want to talk about the negative things that are happening. We don't want to talk about the challenges that our community are facing. And so you just go so far to the other extreme that you either sound out of touch with what's going on in your community, or worse, you sound like you're lying. Because if my marketing is all, everything here is great, our businesses are thriving, everyone is happy, then that obviously isn't going to be true for most communities. So kind of tying back to what I was saying, where it's people are going to judge your community on how you responded. I think we need to be honest. I don't think you need to air all of your dirty laundry, but I think you need to paint a realistic picture. If your unemployment rate has gone up, you need to acknowledge that in your updated marketing. So if you list your unemployment rate, make sure you show your new unemployment rate. You don't have to draw attention to the fact that it's gone up, but just update it. And then make sure that you have an honest tone, an authentic tone, because people are going to see through that and it's going to hurt your community. I think the second thing is also, if you're going to compare yourself to another community and you're going to kind of model what you're doing after what someone else is doing, do it after somebody who is actually comparable to you. Marvin, you and I have talked about this before. Communities look to Charlotte and they're like, what is Charlotte doing? I want to do what Charlotte's doing. But if you aren't Charlotte, or you aren't comparable to Charlotte, or you aren't comparable to Raleigh or to Durham, you can't really use that as a direct comparison. You can aspire, you can take inspiration from some of the things that they're doing, but a lot of what Charlotte is doing isn't going to work in a lot of these particularly rural communities. So find somebody, it doesn't even have to be in North Carolina, it can be in a different state. Find a comparable community and say, what are they doing? What is the messaging that they're using? And how can I use some of the elements from that in my own marketing? So really the key for both of these is just be authentic, be true to yourself. Don't try to paint a really rosy picture, and don't try to be something that you aren't.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm making sure that I take notes on what not to do. So I appreciate it. All right, so let's see what Irene can say in regards to websites. So Irene, what about an organization or a community website needs to change to accommodate that new messaging or marketing?
Thanks, Marvin. So what is going to be most important when you're communicating through your website, or really any communication channel at all, is that your information is credible, correct, and timely. And also, based on what Colleen said, authentic. That's also super important. So this can obviously play out on your website in a number of ways. one important example is regularly updating a page on your site that is purely dedicated to your community's COVID-19 announcements, coverage, FAQs. Given that the COVID situation doesn't show any signs of slowing down, it's prudent to invest in this kind of dedicated material, such as a banner or pop-up message that lives on your home screen, that drives users to your COVID coverage, wherever that may live on your website. And speaking of where it might live, this could be through blog posts. It sort of depends on the way you're set up, but blog posts can provide trustworthy answers to questions that your community is searching for, ones you've received, ones you anticipate. Other examples of what you're gonna wanna put out there for your community is publicly available information that you can aggregate to specifically address what your community is looking for. That would be like a chart, trackers, or infographics that can graphically communicate what's going on. And we can talk a little bit more about details of that later. Videos demonstrating how to access services and how to safely use products, or how you recommend businesses adapt to the public health crisis. Those videos can be really helpful. We like to consume media in every which way, so having that on your website can be really effective. A newsletter is an effective way. Colleen was talking about the blessings of direct marketing via email. That's an effective way to communicate because you can create content that is super specific to your sectors. So for example, if you want to create content that speaks directly to the food and beverage industry, service safety and food regulations are going to look very different to, are going to be really important to those industries, but not so much to other folks. So you're really applying information to those specific sectors. Social media obviously should communicate your messaging. It's another helpful tools, and all the same standards should apply: credible, correct, timely, and, as Colleen said, authentic. And lastly, I think everyone should share thoughts from their leadership, like a live webinar or a video chat with different company leaderships or panels of experts can really go a long way, no matter if you're in a Charlotte or a smaller community. Finding those voices in the community is incredibly important, and they can help really bring to life your brand through the various channels. So it comes off as authentic and it feels real to those people who are actually need to hear from you and need your leadership.
Okay, so this is pretty interesting for me. So now that I know what we need to do with our websites or social media, let's talk a little bit more about the specifics. I want to get into the weeds on this. What type of the frequently asked questions or stats and data that communities or the people there are expecting to see from the municipalities or the economic development leaders in the community?
So, like I mentioned before, a regularly updated page on your site purely dedicated to COVID information that it pertains to your community is going to be essential. So again, in practice, this is going to be a dedicated page. You want to clearly broadcast the newest information at the top of the web page and show how communications have progressed over the past week, month, or maybe even year. With so much information being dispensed from various news sources, your audience will definitely appreciate the ability to clearly grasp updates without having to reread announcements that have been previously published. On this page, a very popular and effective tool is a dashboard that can include confirmed cases, deaths, average age data, and demographics around COVID-19 cases. But as it applies to sort of the economic temperature in your area, you can include plugins for heat maps and job loss vulnerability indexes in your area. So it's not, while national data is gripping and interesting, getting down into the nitty-gritty of your community is going to be most important to those visiting your website. So data can obviously, like I just said, be presented on different levels. You're going to want to provide information that directly applies to your community. So you want to think about state versus county versus city levels and how far down the ladder you want to go. But I want to remind everyone that it doesn't have to be all doom and gloom, and that you can, while you're presenting the data clearly and correctly, you can also celebrate positives. So using your updates and communications avenues to show how the different success stories in your communities exist, what local businesses are doing to pivot during the crisis, showing what, ingenuity is really coming out during this crisis. I strongly suggest celebrating those wins because we all need them. As you asked, Marvin, FAQs are important. If your team is receiving the same questions over and over again, a great rule of thumb is to create an FAQ page outlining questions and answers just to get ahead of the communication curve. It will save your staff and time, energy, and yourself, and your audience will just appreciate the proactive approach. To get further into the weeds, more specifics that you can include are recovery fund information and direct links to applications. These obviously range from the federal to the local level and can be complicated and confusing. So making it clear that you're offering, for economic developers, offering the resource for helping folks fill out applications can go a long way. I call this sort of section of your website the resource roundup, and that'll just sort of break down what is available to businesses. So going from federal to state. So for example, the North Carolina COVID-19 Rapid Recovery Lending Program, that's one of many that could be listed, down to the county, down to local. So for example, giving even updates to these things. In Durham here, there's a small business recovery fund that just got updated to include businesses in the county, not just Durham city limits as it was before. So just constantly keeping that stream of information and utilizing your website, direct email, social media to make sure all of that is known. And I just want to give a side comment about multilingual offerings. I think every community is completely different. So if that's something that's important to your community, you want to make sure accessibility is paramount. So make sure you have those multilingual offerings across your platform. Another specific is something I like to call the reopening assistance kit, which is something we've done for smaller communities. We have another office up in New York. We service a lot of economic development offices in the western part of the state of New York, and we've created these assistant kits, which can include things like signage and printing resources. While the CDC has available signage for download, providing branded signage templates for local businesses allows for economic developers to create cohesion in their messaging, their branding, through graphics, colors, and locally relevant messaging. In Durham, there's a big project going on called Back on the Bull, because Durham's the Bull City. Things like that really feel local and sort of evoke pride in the community. These signage would have open signs, safety signs, even signage for the floor about how to direct people through a business. And you also don't want to forget printing resources, because not everyone has large format printing at the tip of their fingers. So also including those in your reopening assistance kit for businesses that are looking to utilize that kit. And lastly, just a bit about phasing communication on your website and across your communication channels. You want to think about how you want to talk to your audience about phasing. and how you want to segment your information. So back to segmented email marketing. If you want to create corners of your website that are for small businesses versus different type of sectors, you can also go about it that way. It's just really important to consider each phase of reopening or dialing back to make it clear for anyone who's coming to you for information about how the community is going to progress or regress when it comes to opening businesses. But back to avoiding communication that's just doom and gloom. You want to include in those communications local ways to enjoy life in X town or X city, things you can still do that are compliant with whatever phase you're communicating. So that's sort of the last thing. Don't forget, it's not all doom and gloom.
And I want to interject something really quick to kind of add on to something Irene was saying. When you're putting all of this information on your website, I see a lot of communities throw a bunch of stuff onto a COVID page and then they do nothing else with it. And while that is an excellent resource, and I absolutely think it's something communities should have, I think that information can also be placed in relevant target industry pages or relevant other pages. So we know that the most popular pages on a website for economic development are sites and buildings, economic data, workforce training and education, and then target industries. So for example, let's use workforce training and education. So if you have things specific to addressing concerns about education, so if I'm an employer and I know I'm going to hire a bunch of welders, my concern right now is that the local community college isn't having classes. So on that workforce training and education page, if you can include some language that addresses those concerns. And if I am a site selector and I'm looking at the sites and buildings page, one of my concerns may be, how is a site visit going to be structured right now? So if you can include language about that, if you can say, right now we're only doing virtual, here's a little bit about how that's structured, or we're doing in person, here's how that would go. So if you can include, sprinkle that information about on relevant pages and also have that one master page, because I don't think, if I'm a site selector, I may not read through everything on that master COVID page, but I am going to look at other pages where I'm going to need that stuff.
Well, thank you for that. So I did want to follow up with another question. What are some additional communication tactics that a community or a brand can implement, Irene?
I touched a little on social media. Obviously, it depends on your community and sort of how they consume media. But I think one important thing is partnering with key media. So economic developers should consider creating an extended communications team, which is comprised of local media organizations, civil organizations, local influencers to help create content and promote and reinforce messages related to the containment measures and related to, like Colleen was saying, different sectors. So your partners could that you've selected could help close sort of the dissemination gaps and sort of help coach the community with information that you're also trying to get across. And it helps ease the pressure on local economic developers and helps information sort of seep into the community in a variety of different ways. So that's sort of the primer on that.
I appreciate that. So now I want to open it up to the audience. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the question and answer part of the screen. If not, I did want to ask the team another question, or the panel. Can you guys share some examples of how other organizations have managed the crisis and economic impact? Ginger, can I start off with you with that question?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. As I had mentioned earlier, at the onset of the pandemic, we immediately implemented crisis communication plans for each of our clients. And one example is GoLine Mass Transit System. and it's a fare free public transportation system in South Florida. It's actually a model for other transit systems across the nation. And to Irene's point, we immediately created a COVID-19 page and throughout the website and made it very, very clear on the website homepage where to get the information. But we also communicated immediately with media, clients, and local governments with clear steps being implemented to protect the public, including videos, which was a really nice visual way to share with them how the transit system was actually right down to fogging the buses at nighttime and what they were doing to keep them safe. Also, press releases, social media posts, and email messages coincided with all of that. So we were transparent with every step the transit system was taking to ensure the public was kept as safe as possible and was aware of changing in routes and procedures. So during the stay-at-home order, the buses were obviously not running as frequently. So we worked with nonprofit organizations and offered them safe transportation via the buses to safely deliver food and essential supplies to at-risk seniors and families throughout the county. Well, new opportunities actually came out of that, including a free grocery shopping assistance program for seniors that will actually stay in place after the crisis ends. So we included the county in our plans, and in response, received CARE Act dollars for the new program. And this was a big plus for the county because the county attracts retirees and they need to sustain their real estate markets as well. Another example is we also researched and wrote grants for immediate relief and consideration of new programs emerging because of the crisis. And I would encourage you to watch for these types of grants that are still coming up. One particular grant was through Meals on Wheels America and Humana. So we proposed that the local Meals on Wheels would work with local restaurants by purchasing one extra meal each week to be delivered to homebound at-risk seniors. So the local Meals on Wheels organization has actually experienced a 75% increase in demand since all of this started. So the award of the grant was definitely welcomed. And the collaboration is helping local restaurants get back on their feet as well. So again, how communities like this work together is really important to growth. For some of the other sectors like general contractors and architectural clients, we immediately created a new campaign strategy, direct marketing, to stay directly in front of their clients, but not in a way that advertised services. That was not necessary, but with a Your Home is Essential campaign message. And we delivered weekly messages through video and direct marketing, direct emails that linked the clients to digital activities and information that was not only entertaining, but also what was going on in their own community and informational things that they would need during this time that normally, we needed a way to get that information to them, and it was almost like a sponsorship of these clients that provided that information. So to Irene and Colleen's points as well, all the websites, social media outlets, and direct communication with clients and staff were updated immediately, and we continue to do that because changes continue to transpire. We really don't see an end in sight, but with what we're doing, we always keep the brand's essence consistent, and I think that's incredibly important. And we have found ways to get that message to the stakeholders.
And to follow up on that too, from a standpoint of a lot of the economic development clients that we have, our advice to them this whole time has been to try to basically make up for the things you aren't able to do. So I talked a little bit earlier about the email marketing campaign that we're doing for an organization in North Carolina. That came about because the team there can't travel. Most of their sales, because they are a utility provider, most of what they do at conferences, and most of the networking that produces business comes from them being at conferences, which they aren't able to do. And so it was this question of, well, if I can't get in front of my audience in person this year, how can I get in front of them with this message? And so that really ties back to this strategy of asking, basically, what is the problem that I'm trying to solve? And if it's that I can't get in front of my clients the way I want to, or my prospective clients the way I want to, how can you address that? And maybe it's video, maybe it's taking this time to update your website to show video of your available sites and buildings. It doesn't necessarily have to be drone, it doesn't have to be really fancy, but if you can just do a walkthrough of a building, maybe have a narration on talking about the community and the building itself and your assets, doing those things to replace other stuff that you would normally be able to do. And the reason a lot of communities are able to pay for that stuff is because they aren't doing the original things. So the emailers that we did, the way we paid for that was by using the money that had been earmarked for travel because they weren't traveling. So kind of moving that stuff around and really addressing those pain points that you can't market the way you normally did. And so how can you market in a different way that's just as effective?
Irene, I wanted to give you an opportunity to chime in on that. But if you don't have anything for that question, we do have one for you in the question and answer.
Oh, okay. I'm happy
All
to
right.
take that.
So in regards to the information that you said that needed to be on the website and having that available, can this be sufficiently covered through Facebook posts and updates, or by linking to a central site that manages this type of information, possibly to the local health department in constant update?
Yes, so that's kind of two questions. I mean, if Facebook is your only asset at this point and your only point of communication, that, I mean, utilize what you have available. But if you have a website and you're able to dedicate your page, a page to COVID, there are a lot of plugins that come that you can download from the CDC websites that include heat maps and different assets. There's I don't know if we're doing any sort of follow-up, but I have several links that can help you sort of show the data. It sort of automatically populates, where you don't need to have a graphic designer beautifully, designing something that ticks numbers up and down. There are more automated services that are available that I'm happy to share, just to answer that question. But back to Facebook, if that's the way you disseminate your information, I say go for it.
All right. Well, we do have just a little bit more time, so if you have any questions, please drop them in the question and answer on the screen. If not, I wanted to ask a question to the panel, if at all possible.
Mm-hmm.
What organizations have you seen pivoted in their marketing the right way? What are some best in practices that we can go look at right now as economic developers, as this organization got it right?
If you don't mind me mentioning somebody outside of North Carolina, I know it's awful. They're part of the Charlotte Metro, so I think it's okay. Lancaster County, South Carolina did a good job of, right at the beginning of this, recognizing that the reshoring of medical supply manufacturing and medical supply research was going to be a significant thing to happen. And they immediately started putting out messaging. It's been probably 3 or 4 months since I've seen it, but I believe that there was a infographic or some sort of document that they were sharing on social media and via email that was highlighting their specific assets with regards to that. So it was talking about schools in the state and probably the 2-state region that have medical research as part of their education system. They talked about assets as far as utility costs, transportation of getting things like plastics in, because that's a big deal. So we saw them really pivot to that and really push hard for that and really get that messaging out there. That wasn't just, hey, we want this. It's, we want this and here's why we're good for it.
Anyone else would like to share organization that you guys seen pivot in marketing that we can go look at?
I actually have a client who opened a business during COVID, and it was the Durham Food Hall, obviously located here in Durham, and we really opened with this hand-in-hand communication about how safety measures were going to be taken, how the business was pivoting the event spaces, how they were going to be utilized or not utilized for the time being. But most recently, the client joined what I think is a really cool incentive in Durham, which is the sort of no mask, no service concept that's part of the Back on the Bull campaign, which is to get small businesses back on track. And it sort of folded in seamlessly to Durham Food Hall's overall really, really, really community focused messaging. Every vendor, every food sourcing avenue is all local. That's the whole point of it. And so it was keeping it hyper local, being part of these local campaigns, and really strategically layering in the messaging. It's really made it cohesive and clear to everyone what their goals are and where they're going, because it's not easy to open in the middle of all of this. So I was very proud of them.
All right. Ginger, did you have one or?
Actually, it kind of went back to some of the examples that I had shared earlier, but one organization, which is Senior Resource Association, and it's a state affiliated organization. They really did an awesome job, especially as a nonprofit organization. Sometimes they're hesitant to make a move for fear of what's going to happen with their stakeholders or the county at large and their dollars. They did an incredible job of really looking at all of their programs. They're not a single focused nonprofit organization. Although they serve seniors, they have literally 4 or 5 different programs that cater to at-risk seniors within all of the communities. And they did a very good job of following the lead of really implementing their crisis communication plan and not being afraid of what that might mean in the future. And what happened as a result is it led to new opportunities for them and new programs that they have launched that they probably wouldn't have considered, or they would have been hesitant to launch had it not been for this crisis. So they really stepped up to the plate, and I was proud of them for doing that.
Thank you for sharing. We have another question to come in. So following up on Colleen's point on organizations developing leads at conferences, do any of the panelists have opinions on what have been the most effective tactic during this time in developing new leads? Is that email, website updates, LinkedIn updates, etc.?
So something that we personally have done, I think that this ties back to, we're talking about conferences, replacing conferences. I think we think of sales as being extremely formal. It's me pitching to you all the time, but really it's a lot about building relationships. And some of these are going to take time to curate. And that's the thing that's great about conferences, is having those informal interactions with people who can become leads for you. So something that we have done with Brand Acceleration is we've done these weekly cocktail hours. And I know I was looking through the participant list, a few people on this webinar have been in those little cocktail hours with us. It's just an informal setting. They're usually 30 minutes to an hour, where we just bring together a few people to chat with them about what's going on. And I think sometimes if you're trying to talk to a site selector, you're trying to talk to any site location professional, maybe in one of your industries, if you call or email with the tone of, hey, can I call you and talk to you for half an hour? I want to try to sell you something. They're going to say no. But if you call and want to pick their brain about something, or if you can reach out and say, you know, I saw an article that you wrote, I have a couple of questions about it, just getting in front of them and having that interaction with them in a way that doesn't feel like a really strong sales pitch gets your foot in the door. And then when you communicate to them later on, they are familiar with you. So I think that if we take that time to really curate those relationships in a way that doesn't feel like a constant sales pitch, you're going to have that success. And it may not pay off tomorrow, but we're talking long term. We're talking, where do you want to be 6 months, a year from now? That stuff can pay off in the longer term. And we've had situations come out of those for us personally, where we have somebody that we've never met that we have on one of these hangouts with us. And then 6 weeks later, we get a phone call that's like, hey, I wasn't ready 6 weeks ago, but I'm ready now to talk about marketing. Can you help us with that? So just being informal and just not being pushy, I think, is a really strong strategy for replacing that conference setting.
All right, thank you. Anyone else wants to chime in?
No, I love that answer.
All right. So we're going to go ahead and close this out with that. This will conclude today's webinar. Thank you to our 3 guests, Ginger, Irene, and Colleen, for this great information. We hope everyone who logged in found this discussion valuable. Our thanks again to the NCEDA's annual sponsors for this year round of support and learning programs like this. We have a full slate of webinars coming up in August that you'll want to make note of. The next one will take place on August the 4th, From Calm to Crisis, Tips and Tools for Marketing and Communications. Following quickly on August the 6th, we have Fundraising in Challenging Times, will be presented by Convergent Nonprofit Solutions. Watch your emails carefully for more news about those and other events on the calendar for August. And we hope that you plan to join us for the 2020 Virtual Annual Conference on August the 26th. Visit the NCEDA website for more details. We look forward to seeing you again soon. In the meantime, stay engaged, stay confident, and stay well.